Hello and welcome back to Freedom Side Live. I am your host, Zoe Alexandra, and I'm very excited to be joined by co-host Rania Khalek. Hello, Rania. How are we doing today?
Hey, Zoe, we're doing good. How are we doing today? That was very, it reminded me of when I worked in the service industry and I'd be like, hey, folks, how are we doing today?
Oh,
what are we ordering today?
It's like the mind knows where it goes.
The collective we.
The collective we. Well, we have a great show for people today. It is action-packed, story-packed. We're gonna talk, of course, about the ongoing uprising in Bolivia. We're going to talk about the latest revelations from Pakistan, the elections coming up in California and what they mean for people of California, but also people of the United States, the latest on Iran, and of course, we could not skip over Cuba and the recent indictment of Cuban leader Raul Castro. So lots to get into today. We're very excited, and we have a great lineup for everyone. So really stay tuned, and especially if you want to hear about Cuba, stay tuned till the end. But before we get into those stories, just have some housekeeping and reminders for everyone. We at Breakthrough News are an independent media outlet. That means we do not take donations from any corporations like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, which Rania, when we were in Northern Virginia, seeing all of them just one after the other, it's like, oh, wow, these are the people who are paying for the news as it is and politics as it is, which is promoting war, whitewashing genocide and all of that. We are not those media outlets. We are bringing you independent, fact-based, on-the-ground reporting, news that matters to you and the analysis that you need to understand the world around you. So if you want to support this independent media outlet, please go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. Become a patron today.
A patron.
Support Breakthrough News at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And you can support us for as little as $5 a month. Additionally, if you can't do that right now, smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure to share the episodes with your friends, colleagues, whoever's number you have in your phone book. Send them the episode. Again, we're getting into a lot of things today. Every week, we're bringing you fresh analysis and updates from regions of the world, which oftentimes either the corporate media chooses to ignore or it willfully manipulates what's happening there on the ground. So with all of that, Rania, anything to add?
Yes, I want to just note that Zoe cannot hear the sound effects that John plays in the background. And I think it's so sad. You're missing out. There's such good sound effects. We have to fix that. There's one right now. Oh, I'm so sad you can't hear them, Zoe. You're really missing out. There was a few while you were talking. That's why. Oh, thank you. Thank you. There's applause now. But no, everything Zoe said, I just want to reiterate patreon.com/breakthrough news. We're not millionaires propagandizing for billionaires here, which is how the rest of the media functions. We're truth tellers who are bringing you the reality of so much of the world that gets ignored, especially countries across the global south. And we're going to be talking about so much of that today. I also want to remind people to, if you just want to do a one-time donation while you're watching, you can actually donate in the live chat. So very exciting stuff. And if you do donate in the live chat, we will, read your name and comment on air if you leave a comment. So
heck yeah.
Consider that.
Consider that and the moment of fame that it will bring you and the joy that you'll be bringing to our hearts. But yes. With all of that, let's get started because as we said, we are going across the world today. And we're going to start with Bolivia. Protests calling for the resignation of right-wing President Rodrigo Paz have rocked Bolivia for several weeks. And there's been considerable escalation in the past week with many movements and trade unions calling for and participating and launching a general strike. Road blockades have been staged across the country, bringing Bolivia to a standstill in many places. Diverse sectors of Bolivian society have come out onto the streets demanding salary increases, protection of land rights, and once again, a uniting demand calling for the resignation of Rodrigo Paz. In response, unsurprising here, the Rodrigo Paz government has attempted to minimize this uprising, accusing former President Evo Morales of being behind the protests, and on the other hand, mobilizing its friends in the region to condemn the protest in a joint statement that was unsurprisingly signed by governments like Argentina and Ecuador. So to understand all of what's happening in Bolivia right now, we are very honored to be joined by Bolivian journalist Ollie Vargas, also a good friend of us here at Breakthrough News. Ollie, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again.
Amazing. Well, Ollie, to start off, we want to get just kind of a general picture of what's happening in Bolivia. We know that several trade unions have called for a general strike. Peasant and indigenous movements had several weeks back organized a long march to the capital, road blockades across the country. So give our audience an overview of what is happening across the country. Why have people taken to the streets, and what are these kind of major demands that we're seeing raised?
Yeah, this is now day 9 of the general strike in Bolivia that was called by the main trade union federation, which encompasses both urban workers but also rural workers, campesinos as it's say in Spanish. And this, if you're looking from the outside, it might seem, how can this be just 7 months into a government and we already have this? But in fact, this is an accumulation of the numerous demands of people and numerous issues that people are concerned with. Primarily, the issue of privatization of natural resources, which is what the government is trying to push through at the moment, but also immediate bread and butter issues such as inflation and the rise in poverty, which has absolutely skyrocketed in the past few months. Now, these were all policies that were certainly predictable when the new government took power. And at the time when they took power, I said this government will not last the 4 years of legal mandate that it technically has, because the Bolivian people are far too organized, are far too rebellious to allow all of this agenda to be pushed through. So this is why less than a year in, almost half a year into this government, we're already seeing an uprising. And it's not an uprising over this or that issue. It's a generalized and political uprising. And that's why everyone on the streets, when different media outlets are there, they say there's nothing, there's nothing to negotiate on. We don't need dialogue because we simply don't. There's a contradiction in our demands and what they want. So there's nothing to dialogue there. There's no middle ground. Either they privatize our country, either they sell out our country to the United States, or we stop that from happening. There's not a middle ground there. And that's why the demand of this general strike is the resignation of the government, and not just repeal or enact this law. It's the resignation of the whole government, because there is no room for dialogue.
Ollie, it was unsurprising that our favorite White House tyrant, little Marco Rubio, had something to say about this mass people's movement against neoliberalism. So U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday tweeted the following. He said, "Let there be no mistake. The United States stands squarely in support of Bolivia's legitimate constitutional government. We will not allow criminals and drug traffickers to overthrow democratically elected leaders in our hemisphere." So, Ollie, what do you make of this message? Because on the one hand, it's slandering the Bolivian people, right? Accusing them of being criminals and drug traffickers. And of course, on the other hand, it's a blatant message of meddling, of interference in Bolivian internal politics at a time when the government is actually violently repressing protesters. It seems that this tyrant, Marco Rubio, has found a protest that he doesn't like so much.
Of course, on the face of it, you have to think if there's an internal dispute within Bolivia about the issue of, for example, inflation. What does that have? What has that got to do with anyone that's not Bolivian? Really, that's a domestic issue, right? And Bolivia is a very small country. It's only got 11 million people. Very, very one of the smallest countries in the Americas. Marginal to the global economy. So why is the United States going to these lengths to condemn people, to get involved in Bolivia's internal politics? And of course, there's issues such as the issues of natural resources and gas, etc. But I think the most important issue that the United States is concerned with in this moment is the fact that we are seeing a movement that, when it's united, can overthrow a government. The specific strategies that are being seen at the general strike of, first of all, having a general strike, an organized general strike in the cities and the countryside, but also the strategy you're seeing now in Bolivia of essentially blocking highways, erecting barricades by striker workers, erecting barricades to block off all of the major highways of the country, which completely shuts down all trade and economic activity that we see in the country. So this has paralyzed the government. If it's sustained, the government will have no option but to collapse. So it shows a road path to other countries in Latin America and around the world, in Africa, across Asia, and numerous other countries, that if you have this level of organization, US puppet states can be overthrown. And this was the rise of the right in Bolivia, and the fact that a right-wing government took power in Bolivia was fated as a big win for the United States. But actually, what we're seeing is that these are very fragile in the face of a united organization from below. And so if this is successful in overthrowing this government, then all movements all around the region and around the world will see and seek to emulate that. And that's why the United States has a massive interest right now in crushing that. And on the issue of drug trafficking, of course, absolutely ridiculous. Is actually the inverse is true. Bolivia is a country that produces the coca leaf, and before Evo Morales took power, was a big player in cocaine production. After the DEA was expelled, was where the production of coca and cocaine went down enormously. So this is not only not true, is actually an inversion of reality.
Yeah, no, they love to, at the same time, release drug traffickers like Juan Orlando Hernandez and then turn around and accuse other people of being involved in drug trafficking. It's it would be an inconvenient narrative if they didn't have power over this. So, getting to the point, Ollie, about the Rodrigo Paz government, you said this is a very weak government. Again, it's only been in power since November, and he has been met with constant opposition kind of at every turn. What is Rodrigo Paz attempting to achieve, and what is his strategy for doing so? And how is all of this related to the recent allegations that there was a plot, maybe backed by the United States, to assassinate, former President Evo Morales?
In terms of the reaction of the government in Bolivia right now, there's essentially no reaction. They feel cornered. They don't know what to do. They haven't been able to announce measures. They also are hesitant to unleash a wave of serious repression, because they know that would be a further trigger to intensify the uprisings even more than what they are now. So they're in a situation. They're in a kind of limbo where they don't know where to turn next. Now, in terms of the plot to arrest Evo Morales, we received documents last week about a plan, a joint operation between the Bolivian police and U.S. forces, which listed in the documents were the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the U.S., to organize a task force of 2,000 troops to go in and arrest Evo Morales, who is currently protected by thousands of union members in his home region, and essentially massacre people there in order to be able to get to Evo Morales. I think this is something that goes much deeper. The fact that the DEA was listed is only because the DEA has been given now formal legal authorization to operate in Bolivia by the current government. However, it's pretty clear, and we have a lot of information from sources even within the police and military that they have to put the DEA because they're the only ones legally allowed to operate in Bolivia. But that's actually a cover for other much more advanced forces from the US, namely the CIA, to lead this operation. So it's a very dangerous situation. The fact that it was leaked has delayed it. It was essentially supposed to take place at the end of last week, this operation. It has now so far not materialized, mostly because of the outbreak of the strikes, but also the fact that all of the operation, the details of the operation were all leaked by people within the police and military who are still loyal to the country, right? Because this is an issue of national sovereignty. More than anything.
And then, I want to ask you, Ali, the loss of Bolivia to the right wing after 2 decades of progressive rule marked this major blow to the progressive bloc across Latin America. And of course, that wasn't the only one. The region as a whole has suffered these massive setbacks with both electoral defeats, but also a much more heavy-handed U.S. approach under current President Donald Trump. So, I'm curious, what's your assessment of where the region stands today and what the task of the Latin American left is in times of the Don Roe doctrine?
Well, I'm certainly very opposed to a defeatist attitude that sees everything in a bleak way because, just in the example of Bolivia, the reason, unfortunately, that the left lost power in Bolivia was because of internal divisions. But throughout the history of Latin America, movements have risen, they've fallen, and they've picked themselves back up again to fight. Just in Latin America, look back at the 70s and 80s when, my own grandfather was tortured during that period. And people faced things even more difficult than what we face today. And even in the darkest depths of those moments, people were able to dust themselves off, reorganize, create new forms of resistance, new forms of political organization, which then took power in a majority of countries in Latin America. Now, of course, there has been a retreat since then, but that only means that there has to be another wave of analysis and of reorganization. And the picture is certainly not as bleak, I think, as is being painted. I think another important context in Latin America and for the reasons that the United States is trying to now attack Cuba is that their regime change operations elsewhere are failing. For example, they've had enormous election interference operations ongoing currently in Colombia, who have presidential elections next week, on the 30th of May. And the campaigns of disinformation originating in Washington have absolutely failed, and the left is set to win by a very large margin there with the candidate Ivan Cepeda in Colombia. The same is true in Brazil. There's been an enormous regime change effort in an election interference campaign to rig the elections against Lula in Brazil and to restore Bolsonaro, this time with his son, Flavio Bolsonaro. That is also failing, and Lula is ahead in the polls, partially because he was able to stand up to Trump on numerous issues. So all is not lost, and the defeats that there are cause for study and analysis in order to reorganize. And anyone who's been on the on the on the socialist level know that the history of this movement is one of being massacred and then coming back in a new form. Look at the Paris Commune. Imagine if people gave up then. Everyone was killed. Everyone was slaughtered there. But then, a lot more history happened after that.
Very well taken. Thank you so much, Ollie Vargas, for helping us understand what's happening in Bolivia. Definitely important to keep our eyes there, and we'll see if your prediction is true regarding the viability of the past government. And I'm sure we'll be circling back with you for more analysis on this issue.
No, thank you, guys.
Great. Well, certainly reason to have hope, Rania.
Yeah, sorry, I'm like adjusting my chair here. Yes, there's so many bad things happening in the world that this was like a little ray of light. I'm like, the people are rising up in Bolivia. So good job, people. Keep it going. One thing I do know is if Marco Rubio is upset, I'm a happy gal.
That is very true. And he is almost never happy. So we should all take joy in that.
That's true. Gotta take the small wins, guys.
Gotta take the small wins. And we're definitely going to be talking more about him later on. But now we shift to Pakistan, where recent revelations have shaken politics internally. This week, within the last week, our colleagues at Dropsite News published the full text of the classified diplomatic cable known as the Cipher, which shows that officials at the U.S. State Department had threatened in 2022 that Pakistan would suffer greatly if Khan remained in office, and that, quote, this would all be forgiven, unquote, if he were removed in a no confidence vote. Well, we know now this is exactly what happened, and this was followed by a wave of charges and accusations against Khan, which many of them were full of, significant legal irregularities, but in fact, they did succeed in taking Khan out of politics and putting him in prison. Meanwhile, an Al Jazeera report published last week revealed that a mutual defense pact that Pakistan had established with Saudi Arabia may be expanding with the involvement of Turkey and Egypt, and with some support from China. So Pakistan's prime minister's headed to Beijing next week. Lots going on. To make sense of both of these stories and how they are connected, we're joined by Junaid Ahmad, who's a professor of law, religion, and global politics, and the director for the Center of Study of Islam and Decolonization in Islamabad, Pakistan. Welcome to the show, Junaid. How are you doing?
I'm well. Good to be with you guys. And Zoe, you become the expert of all things Latin American in Pakistan. It was great to host you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, Zoe.
Well, glad to be of service and glad that you're here on the show, because we desperately need your analysis on these major news items happening in your country. So first, we want to ask, now that this cipher, this cable is public, it is something that people have been talking about for a long time. Imran Khan himself had been kind of denouncing the existence of such a cable. Do you think that its publication will have any ramifications internally in Pakistan or on Imran Khan's case?
Well, I know I've been on this show several times, and I don't want to sound like a broken horse on this, but just to make clear of what this thing is all about. So this is the word that Pakistanis have learned over the past few years, the term cipher, which is a reference to this diplomatic cable. And Dropsite News had first released part of it in 2023. And what they said was that for security reasons, they could not release in its entirety up until just this beginning of this week. And what that cipher was basically the United States, the State Department, sending a message through the Pakistani ambassador in Washington that they're uncomfortable with the aggressive neutrality of the Prime Minister Imran Khan. He had the unfortunate luck of landing in Moscow on the day of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. He had no idea about that, but he just landed there. And he was accused of aggressive neutrality. And within that memo, basically they said that, but if you remove the guy, all will be forgiven. The question is, someone needs to tell me what is supposed to be forgiven, but that's just the way empires speak to their clients. And yes, he was overthrown in that March, April 2022 regime change operation with the open connivance of the generals in Pakistan. So it was, I don't want to say it's just Washington wanted it and the generals like, oh
Right.
no, I guess we have to do this. No, by this point, if we understand Pakistan, the military has always had this inordinate role in the political life of the country, and especially on questions of foreign policy. And of course, that was one of the main components of Khan's platform, an independent foreign policy, as opposed to the entire history of Pakistan, where it has basically done the bid of the United States, including the era that really defined Khan's politics, which was the war on terror. Now, we have to remember that Khan's position against drone strikes, against military operations, all of those got him the credibility that allowed him to then win in 2019. And again, before people start to think that, well, it was natural that the US would want to kind of conduct a regime change against this anti-American guy. No, he said that he will be friends with everyone, including Washington, in times of peace, but not in times of war. So they just couldn't tolerate this pacifist who would not go along with a variety of these different programs that the United States, as well as the Gulf countries, had assigned to him.
Of course, I want to remind people this didn't happen under Donald Trump. This was in 2022, right? Meaning it happened under Joe Biden. So this kind of like gangster behavior towards countries that we're seeing a little bit more openly right now under this administration isn't new. But Junaid, it's interesting because this cipher drops at the exact moment that Pakistan's military is being celebrated for mediating between the US and Iran. So you have the same generals who pushed Khan out of power now being rewarded as indispensable regional brokers. What does that tell us about how this relationship between Washington and Islamabad actually works?
Well, it tells us that that cipher was probably true, first of all, because the relationship between Pakistan and the United States since the removal of Khan has just, gotten better and better by year by year. Better by better, I mean, in terms of the relationship between the two regimes, between the can call it a political regime. It just has a political civilian facade over what is really a military dictatorship in Pakistan, and its relationship with now Donald Trump, which is one of the things people often thought that, well, Trump and Khan had such a nice relationship when they met. Trump could give a damn, like when he came to power, in doing anything for Khan. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That relationship right after the regime change, but especially when this new chief of army staff, Trump's favorite Field Marshal Munir, when he came to power, that was all about trying to market Pakistan as this place where you can, the rare earth minerals, all sorts of, sweet deals that we will allow the U.S. to have. It was really selling to the U.S. that please, remember us, Pakistan. This is how the generals, in fact, have always operated, as well as the politicians, right? So they have tried to kind of sell themselves, and they did get in the good books of Trump, especially when the prime minister nominated him for the Peace Prize, after he, of course, ended the genocide in Gaza. So, this is the unique position that Pakistan is that it has this relationship with all of these different countries, right? Including with China. That's like the most important relationship that it's had since the 1960s. So it has a relationship with China, obviously now with the United States, with the Gulf countries, with Saudi, and it has, although it's been a roller coaster ride with Iran, at present, it has had a decent relationship. Now, I think that we should see this all in the context of a singular phenomena, and that is the insane, reckless, violent behavior of Israel. Right? Like, that is what is shaping this entire region, where even the regimes that we may despise, they are shit scared of Israeli behavior, and they see that the United States is unable or unwilling to do anything to restrain it or to protect them. That certainly goes for the Gulf countries. So Pakistan is a beneficiary in this context, in that the one thing that maybe Iran should have had to prevent this war, it has nuclear weapons, right? And the Pakistanis, as well as the Turks, they know that if they were able to succeed in Iran, the next targets would be Turkey and Pakistan, not because Turkey and Pakistan have some revolutionary governments, but that they are militarily very powerful. And Pakistan, of course, has nuclear weapons.
Well, exactly on that point we wanted to hit, which is that, there is this kind of talk that Pakistan, with its military agreement with Saudi Arabia, is now possibly expanding with Turkey and Qatar. We've seen tossed around the possibility of a, quote, Islamic NATO. But, on one hand, Turkey is a NATO member. Qatar hosts, extremely large U.S. base, one of the largest in West Asia. And, once again, Pakistan is playing this kind of in-between role between the U.S. and Iran right now. So is this, in actuality, an independent security architecture? There is a participation of China. But again, is this really more a response to Israeli aggression, or are we seeing something that could truly stand to contest U.S. power in the region?
Right. So we should mention, first of all, the scandal of this thing that I've been writing about for the past few months, the emergence of, and they call themselves that. That's why we use the term, an Islamic NATO or Muslim NATO. The scandal of these guys thinking that they should come together once the majority of the genocide in Gaza has taken place. I mean, this is the power that you want to demonstrate. You allow Israel to genocide Palestinians. But putting that aside, these guys also in some ways come at the heels of that genocide when Trump gathers them all together for his board of peace, right? We remember this late last year, early this year. And so initially this is about, okay, getting together. Trump is bringing us together. This Israel has ended its its rampage in Gaza, but it hasn't really ended it, right? And so then these guys are also seeing that, okay, well, the Israelis see it now with Iran, but even more so with Lebanon, the way it's pounding these countries. So as I was saying earlier, none of these countries on their own feel safe anymore, right? And so you're absolutely right. Late last year, the Saudis and the Pakistanis signed this defense pact. By the way, this defense pact has been debated in Pakistan for quite a while. One of the first instances in which it was rejected in principle was in 2015 when the Saudis launched their war in Yemen. They wanted Pakistan to send troops and to help it. And the Pakistani parliament, to its favor, actually said no, because while they said we're willing to protect you from any outside invasion, we're not going to get involved. So the Saudis have been constantly wanting this for a long time. And again, it's not like Khan went out to insult the Saudis or anyone else, but he said he will not get entangled, in these types of things. And so that defense agreement happens. Now these guys, as you're saying, Qatar and Turkey also want to be a part of it, because in some ways, as I said before, what it is positioning itself now as this Islamic NATO that can restrain Israel in the context when the United States, no matter how many times Trump will call you your favorite field marshal till he turns blue in the face, he won't protect you when the Israelis come after your nuclear weapons, right? So this is what this is about. It has to do with Israeli aggression on Iran. Again, it has nothing to do with what the Israelis did in Palestine to Gazans. No, it has to do with what their behavior right now. And this is why these countries are coming together for this. Now the point is, what you're saying, is this really about some type of sovereignty or independence? Well, for the Saudis right now, or for the Qataris and other Gulf countries, it's basically having other options in terms of who will protect them, that Pakistan nuclear security umbrella, as well as now Turkey. The fact is this really about presenting some type of alternative bloc? One other thing that it's really benefiting from, the Pakistanis especially, is what's going on in India. India has become morally and politically bankrupt. It is like betraying the global south, betraying BRICS, And Pakistan seems like a country more on the side of the global south right now. So it's very much benefiting from that as well. But again, these are very kind of a rapidly changing developments. I don't see this as anything long term. I do see it as a kind of a short term, immediate attempt to preserve these regimes rather than project any type of kind of independent force that would be somewhat even remotely accountable to the needs of their peoples.
But it's still the irony of it, though, is that you have Imran Khan in prison precisely because he, in his limited way, attempted to pursue a kind of independent foreign policy, even if it was just basically being like, I'm staying neutral in this, right? And also kind of courting Moscow, courting Beijing, declaring absolutely not to housing U.S. military or CIA bases, which to the Americans is essentially like blasphemy. But then you could also argue, right, that after this plays a role in his removal, now the same generals who are in charge, who played a role in his removal, are still building the Saudi Pact, still courting Ankara and Doha, still flying to Beijing. So, what do you make of this? And what is the calculation of Pakistan's military political establishment? I mean, obviously, it's not the same calculation of Imran Khan, but hilarious nonetheless that you took out this guy, but then the people who are in charge are still pursuing the same things.
Right. As I said, Pakistan has benefited from a regional environment in which it can portray itself as the guarantor of security in a context where the US is not doing so, right? The US military presence, when we speak about how ironic and scandalous it is, well, now we know these American military presence in these countries in the Gulf are not protecting these countries. They're a magnet. They're a magnet for them being targeted. And so Pakistan is just milking this situation. And the other thing I when we spoke about India, right? We need to speak about the UAE. These countries remain kind of the last two like staunch defenders of Israel, and I don't know why specifically with India, but also in the UAE. One of the things that the Israelis love doing is to even humiliate the friends that they have. You guys may have followed how Netanyahu was bragging about his visit to the UAE, and then when Mohammed bin Zayed tried to deny it, then he doubled down and said, "Oh, even my intelligence head went there," and so on. So it loves to humiliate even its allies. So I have no idea what these countries, and India, for God's sake, right? It held the foreign ministers conference there in Delhi of BRICS, and they wanted to even make a mild statement criticizing the Israelis. Indians and the UAE wouldn't have it. So again, like I'm saying, the Pakistanis really benefit from this situation, and so yes, I think that the Gulf, that architecture of the dependency on the U.S. and that to them seeming like what will protect them from Israel. Right now, all of these countries, they know it, they won't say it, know that Iran is actually fighting their war against Israel and the United States, but especially against Israel. That is Turkey, Pakistan, etc. That will never fight it on their own, but now are at a point where they do realize that yes, this it doesn't matter how close you are to Trump, Washington, etc. The Israelis will do what they want, and that for them, what is it? Any threat in the region, that is that any country that has any military capacity to challenge it. So yes, it is, Rania, you're absolutely right. It is ironic because in the same situation, in different ways, you can imagine Khan also being this kind of a mediator, so on and so forth. But a politician or a public figure in Pakistan that would also be accountable to the population and that also would want to make this, as I'm saying, not just about an Islamic NATO that preserves these regimes, but something that actually advances a far more like a social justice project within these countries as well. Because right now it just seems like a lot of this is containing Muslim anger, right? That has been there since the genocide in Gaza, rather than actually projecting a force that's going to be like a BRICS or something else that is going to change the world. No, I don't think so.
Well, Junaid, incredible analysis there. Very important to break down these developments because at face value, things seem very different often. So it's good to have the nuanced perspective on this, understanding everything within the context within which it takes place. Very important. You're a Marxist, so we appreciate that perspective here. And thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Great to be with you guys and continue the great work that you do.
Great. Well, I think it's safe to say that the war on Iran has definitely changed the entire world, whether it's geopolitical calculations, internal domestic crises, of course, the fuel protests that are taking place in countries across the world, inflation hitting almost every single country, the U.S. included. So that was a great one. That was a great calculation that they did there. Trump and Netanyahu. Thanks, guys.
Good job. Yeah, guys, really well thought out. Appreciate the cost of my groceries and electricity bill. Thank you.
Nobody could have seen that coming, truly.
No one. Yeah, not a single intelligence agency.
Not at all.
Or anyone who just has a brain could have recognized that this would happen. So, it was a tough one. This was a tough one to crack.
But it's good to know that faith. Millions of us are smarter than Donald Trump and Netanyahu. Yeah. We can say firmly.
Seriously. Yeah.
And on that note, continuing on in our show, we are headed to California, where it is a state in the United States for all of our international viewers. People of California are headed to the polls on June 2nd. These are called primary elections, but for those of you who follow politics in other countries, it maybe is better understood as kind of a first round election because the people independent of the party who clinched the first two spots in this, quote, primary, which is also called a jungle primary, head to the next round, which will be in June. And there are over 23 million registered voters in California, and they're going to be voting for who they want their next governor to be, the attorney general, insurance commissioner, members of the California legislature, and much more. Again, and then they will head to the polls in November, where the final vote will be cast by the people of California. This race has been watched quite closely, and there's been a lot of news coming out of California. Of course, California is the state with the largest population in the United States. And not only that, but the GDP of California is $4.2 trillion, which makes it the fourth largest economy in the world. That is nothing to sneeze at. And so to break down what is at stake in this upcoming race, we are honored to be joined by Ramsey Robinson, who's a social worker and a gubernatorial candidate for the Peace and Freedom Party. Ramsey, welcome to the show.
Oh, happy to be here and greetings from California, y'all.
Incredible. We can see the rays of sunshine that we are not getting.
Missing, yeah.
That we're missing here on the East Coast.
On the East Coast, yeah.
Amazing. Well, Ramsey, you're running
a $4 trillion economy will do that.
Oh, yeah. We got to just produce more. We might get better weather.
Yeah. We're not working hard enough over here.
Yeah. But Ramsey, you're running for governor in California. You're running against 60 people, which is wow. And this includes former hosts of Fox News, couple millionaires, a former cop. Ramsey, why are you running in this race, and why do you think it's important that there is a socialist option on the ballot?
Oh, well, to put it simply, California has only 194 people, 194 billionaires that are hoarding, sitting on $1.2 trillion that the working people of California have generated. And the Peace and Freedom Party is in a struggle, in a fight to make sure we get our wealth back to meet all of our needs. Because in California, these challenges that working folks face, and there's 40 million of us on this side and just 194 on the other side, the fact that millions of us are behind on rent, that tens of thousands of us face eviction, that 2.5 million of us in California don't even have health insurance. Well, this is because of these billionaires that are hoarding all that money. And I mean, you said it correctly. And actually, it's not a millionaire that's running. There is a billionaire that is running. I mean, these billionaires, they are the ones that are responsible for the challenges that we just kind of laid out. And there's so many other challenges that we can start to unpack here. So we are really getting our power together to challenge these billionaires. You mentioned that a cop is running. Actually, it's a sheriff We know that the police, the sheriffs, they're the gatekeepers of this system. They're the gatekeepers of the poverty and the exploitation that we experience every day. So we need our own party. And I'm so glad you mentioned a socialist party, because the Peace and Freedom Party is the only party on the ballot that has ballot status that is socialist, which means very simply that the people of California that create all this wealth, we control it. That this economic and political system, we're fighting for one where oppressed people, working class people like us, we have that political power, and we simply plan that $4 trillion economy to meet our needs. And we're not alone in thinking that this is what California needs. I mean, 74% of Californians agree that it's time for a third party that's independent from the Democrats, from the Republicans, and of course, these billionaires that the Democrats and the Republicans serve. And, you know, this is very personal for me. I'm not only the Peace and Freedom Party candidate for governor of California, I'm also a mental health social worker. I work in Bayview, Hunters Point, Shot Out. It is one of the last Black and brown communities in California. And I'm seeing so clearly my fourth year being a mental health counselor that the trauma, the anxiety, the depression, the grief and loss that the children that I work with, well, it's due to this system that we live under, which is called capitalism. And this is the system that the billionaires of California are supporting. So we're really part of not just a political movement, but a mass movement to really put pressure on these billionaires to fight for a California that works for us and not just them.
Oh, God, I love to hear capitalism called out. And that's why it's great to have a socialist running. But of course, one of the arguments we'll often hear, and a lot of people do end up arguing this, even among the progressives on the left, right, is that, you know, California that there's these two Republicans that could end up winning the first round. And then that would guarantee that there would be a Republican governor if that happens. And so, in light of this, many are calling for progressives to drop out and put their support behind Democrats Xavier Becerra or Tom Steyer to ensure that a Democrat finishes in the top two so that it's not a guaranteed Republican win. So how do you respond to that argument, to these people who say, look, we agree with your program and everything you're saying, but to defeat the Republicans, leftists like you, Ramsey, need to drop out?
Well, we say to that if the Democrats are concerned about a Republican getting in office, it's on them to thin the field. That we are the only socialist voice, the only voice that's saying that we need a system that puts people over profit and not profit over people. And I think this really exposes that the Democrats are more concerned, the ones that are running, probably all of them, are more concerned with their political life, their political career, than really what's best for California. And so there's no way we can drop out. Like I said, 74% of Californians know it's time for a voice like this, right? And so we also know that it's up to us, a third party, to continue to fight, to continue to gather steam. And the Peace and Freedom Party is one of the fastest growing political parties in California. And, you know, we're really in a life and death situation here right now. And again, this is personal to me. I'm in my 40s. I remember when Clinton was president. You know, he passed a crime bill that disproportionately put folk like us, Black and brown people, in prison. And Joe Biden wrote that. We can go to Obama as well, obviously another Democrat, who deported more immigrants than Trump did during his first term, that bombed Black people in Libya. So just in California, to bring it back to here, the Democrats have had the super majority in both the House and the Senate for decades. And still, half of California is behind, is living paycheck to paycheck. 15 million of us are drowning in medical debt. So y'all know that old adage that it's insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So we need to stop doing the same thing that we've done, which is voting for the Democrats here in California, and finally say, now we have a party, the Peace and Freedom Party, that is founded in 1967, anti-war from the jump, a Black liberation party from the jump, co-founded by the Black Panthers. They were also socialists. And we have this political vehicle to wield our power to make sure that we make California better. And lastly, I'll just say, this is propaganda. This is propaganda from those same billionaires that want the status quo to stay the same because it works for them. And the majority of Californians are saying now, we don't want the status quo. We need something new in California. We need a party that is for the working people of California, and that's the Peace and Freedom Party.
Well, interestingly enough, as you say, the Democrats have had a supermajority in California before. California is also portrayed as, one of the most progressive states. It is one of the wealthiest states in the United States. Yet, at the same time, it does have one of the highest poverty rates. And it accounts for 25% of the homeless population in the U.S. And as you also pointed to, it also has the highest concentration of billionaires and ultra wealthy. So how did California become such a symbol of the country's inequality crisis? How did we get here?
That's so precise to say that it is a symbol, because it's really a mirror, California, and what's going on in the inequality, what's happening all across the nation. And California just shows that so starkly and nakedly. The fact that on one hand, we, as you mentioned to open up the show, we have a $4 trillion economy in California, the fourth largest economy in the world. We have economies bigger than other nations, right? And we have 194 billionaires that have so much of our wealth. And on the other hand, California also leads the nation, not only in wealth, but in poverty and unemployment. So we have to ask ourselves, how did this inequality come about? And it's really because we live in two Californias, one that's run by these billionaires who do nothing for that money that they are sitting on, right? But call all the shots on the most basic necessities of what we need, right? This is a California where we have these huge corporate landlords. We're talking about homelessness that snatch up, let's put their names on blast: Invitation Homes, Blackstone, American Homes for Rent, snatching up tens of thousands of homes all throughout California, sitting on them, right? They're sitting empty, many of these apartments and homes, driving up the rent, evicting us, and then pocketing that money. And with that money, gambling with it, like a casino chip on Wall Street. And so we also see that in the employment crisis that we have in California, where we have huge corporations, McDonald's, Walmart, Amazon, right, that they break us off just a big enough crumb for us to come back to work the next day. And meanwhile, half of us in California are living paycheck to paycheck. So our campaign is really addressing this inequality, and we are reducing the power that these corporations and these billionaires have. Because when we bring about a rent freeze, right? Can you imagine if just 20% of your paycheck went to the landlord? That's what we can do right now in California with the California Emergency Services Act, right? This is going to be a challenge to those huge corporations. When we implement our guaranteed union jobs at $30 an hour, and we have mechanisms to set that at $30 an hour or more, well, this is going to be a challenge to these huge corporations that exploit us every day. And we're also seeing that all throughout history, it's been the playbook for us is we need to struggle for this in the political arena, in the ballot box, but this also has to spill out over into a mass movement. And that's what the Peace and Freedom Party, that's what the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which I've been a proud member for years. This is what we are doing to really fight back against the evisceration of our rights and the fact that California is so unequal.
No, I mean, it's definitely a microcosm, or I don't even know if a microcosm, because California is so big it could be its own country, but it's definitely something that we see replicated across the country to such an extreme degree, everything that you're talking about. But I also want to ask you about one last thing here, and that is the fact that the California governor's race is taking place amidst this major attack to democratic rights across the country, specifically attempts by Republicans to undermine Black voters and majority Black districts in states like Louisiana and Tennessee. So I want to ask you, how do you understand these kinds of maneuvers, and what does it say about democracy in the U.S. right now?
Oh, well, how do we understand these maneuvers? Well, these are maneuvers by that billionaire class that is behind the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, which is not only racist, which it is, but it really exposes what's going on behind the scenes, that these billionaires that are, using through the right wing, tearing down the Voting Rights Acts, well, they're trying to transfer more of the wealth that we create to them. And we see it by the way that they fear black and brown voters. That's why they're doing these awful things, right? And tearing down these, because they know that black and Latino voters, the vast majority of us are in favor that challenge the wealth that they've stolen from us. And to be specific, 95% of black voters, well, we're for the minimum wage being raised. Like the overwhelming majority of Latino voters and black voters, we believe it's time for free healthcare, right? Fully free universal healthcare, no copays, no deductibles, no premiums, right? And the majority of both of us, sections of voters, black and Latino, well, we think it's time that we start to tax these billionaires to get what we deserve. And in all three of these examples, all three of those would take that money that they've been hoarding from us and put it back in our hands. So they're scrambling, as they've always done really for 50 years now, to make sure that they can try to break our power in the voting booth to make sure that they hold on to that. But it's not going to work, And I think it's really important that we just unpack this a little, because we see what works. It was the civil rights movement, multiracial solidarity, getting out in the streets, foot on the pedal for years, that got the Voting Rights Act in the first place. A mass movement of people. And as soon as that started to subside, well, that's where the billionaires and the right wingers, that's when they started their attacks on our voting rights. So I think it also points to the fact that, yes, go to RamseyForGov.com. If you're in California, vote socialist. We have a whole slate of candidates with the Peace and Freedom Party, and let's use that power that we have in the ballot box. But we also need a mass socialist movement, right, that puts the economic and political power in our hands to make sure that, eventually we have our own system that makes sure that we have the power as voters. And you know what we do with that power. We'd ensure that with as much money that we have, not only in California, but just all across the nation, that we have all of our needs met.
Well, Ramsey Robinson, you have filled me with hope amid these dark times, and we will definitely be following up to see what happens in California. Once again, the fourth largest economy in the world. So very interesting. And thank you for your analysis here with us on the freedom side.
Hey, thank you for giving us a voice, and shout out to everybody in New York City and all across the nation. Take care, y'all.
Amazing. Well, Rania, we're going to continue our ping pong across the world, but I am glad that we do have hope in today's show, because it can be difficult with the news. But I feel inspired about Bolivia, feel inspired about, the possibility of people being able to vote for socialists. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that California energy that he had, just so zen.
Yes. Wouldn't understand that in New York City. It's the polar opposite.
Right. Well, so we're gonna go ahead and move on to another area of the world, a very important one. They're all important, but this one is at the epicenter of an ongoing war, and that is Iran. We are approaching the 3-month mark of the U.S.-Israeli war of aggression on Iran. And despite these ongoing negotiations through Pakistan, the two sides remain deadlocked on the core issues that we've been covering on this show. Trump is once again threatening to resume bombing Iran within days if a deal isn't reached, while the Israelis, of course, continue pushing for renewed escalation. At the same time, Iran appears to be preparing for the possibility of another round of war, rebuilding military infrastructure, tightening its control over the Strait of Hormuz, and warning that any future confrontation could actually expand beyond the region. So, to discuss all of this, we are once again joined by Tehran-based journalist Navid Zarrinal, who's also host of the Colony Archive. Navid, it's so great to have you back on the show. Hope you're doing well.
Rania and Zoe, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's just jump right into it, Navid. I wanted to actually ask you, as we have another deadline approaching, it just kind of feels like we're stuck in a time loop where every week Donald Trump threatens, apocalypse if a deal isn't made, and then backs down from that apocalypse. But, let's see what happens. But the New York Times did recently report that Iran has been using the ceasefire, as they put it, the ceasefire period, to regroup militarily, rebuilding missile sites, relocating launchers, and adapting tactics in anticipation of another possible confrontation that could be looming. And we keep hearing these warnings again every week that the war could restart at any moment. I wanted to hear from your perspective, how real do you sense this threat of another round of war is right now? And I assume Iran is, but I have to ask you, is Iran preparing for renewed bombing? And does Iran, believe the US and Israel are genuinely looking for a settlement or simply trying to buy time and reset for another attack?
So in terms of the readiness, I would say that the Iranians are ready, whether it's the people who are coming onto the streets every night. There are thousands in Tehran that come out every night, and across the country, it's millions of people that come out every night. There's a website where people registered to indicate their readiness to fight a ground war in case the US attacks Iran via the Persian Gulf island. Through a ground operation, and I think the numbers are over 40 million right now who have signed up to fight a ground war. And even if they're not directly fighting, they will contribute to the war effort in other ways, such as by cooking food for the soldiers. So the people are ready, and the state too. I think the Iranian state is also ready, because despite the claims of the Trump administration that Iran's missile launchers and missiles have been depleted and they have no defenses left, I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of missiles that are still available, and they keep producing them, and also the drones that, as you know, are pretty cheap to produce, and Iran has a lot of them in case the US reverse engineered the Iranian Shahed drone that Russia had also used in the war against Ukraine, and I think he called it the Lucas drone. And those are also plenty available. Iran is relatively weaker when it comes to the air defenses, so stopping the US fighter jets and the Israeli fighter jets from bombing Iran. But then when it comes to the retaliation and the precision of their missiles, the reports indicate and the evidence indicates that they're pretty strong in that area. So the state is also ready. So I would say both the people and the states are ready for another round. And the mood here is pretty resilient and inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because there have been numerous reports in Western media saying that, it would be expected, but that the Iranian people are exhausted, that after months of war, they're ready to compromise at any cost, and that people, are frustrated. But then on the other hand, as you say, you're saying that it's hardened people's resolve, and that people are even more defiant. So can you talk about what you're actually seeing on the ground? Is it more of this mood of kind of defeatism and compromise, or are people feeling, or what is kind of the sentiment there with regards even to the US and Israel?
No, it's definitely the opposite of defeatism and compromise. And maybe I've been avoiding the Western media, but I've been seeing that even some of the Western media are admitting that the Iranian states and people are resilient. But you're right that there's also that kind of other part of the Western narrative that Iran is about to collapse at any moment. To the point that even people who are pro-resistance and they understand the nature and the resilience of the Iranian state and economy, they might even buy into that narrative at some point. I know people who are supposed to be pro-resistance who had bought into that narrative in the first days of the war, but then they saw what happened, and I think they were also all surprised. But I'll make one point, a contrast between the pre-war and the post-war. So pre-war, there was some defeatism, and there was this idea that the inflation is really bad, things are not getting better, so let's just compromise and concede. And you had the reformist camp within Iran who had that mentality, and I would also see it when I would socialize with people, and they would say that. But after the war, things have changed. I see less complaining. People have higher spirits, and they don't have the defeatist mentality anymore. And they understand that Iran had the upper hand in the war, and they understand that now through the Iranian leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is actually the country that would be able to get concessions from the US. So everything that I'm seeing here, with some exceptions, of course, is the opposite of defeatism.
You know, Navid, I wanted to ask you, I saw this reported yesterday that Iranian officials warned that if the US and Israel resume bombing Iran, the next phase of the conflict won't remain geographically contained the way it largely has so far, that it would go beyond the region. And this made a huge splash in the US media. And I'm curious what you think they mean by that. Are we talking about escalation maybe against US bases beyond West Asia, shipping lanes, energy infrastructure? You know, how seriously should those warnings be taken?
Yes, no, it's a good question. And I saw that warning too. And there's one possibility that it could just be kind of, talking tough and, it's like war talk that they're trying to play up their capabilities. But the other possibility is that they actually mean it like they did with the 40-day war, because the Iranian leader said that if this time you come and attack us, it will become a regional war. And after he was assassinated, that pronouncement was actually put into action by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and by the Iranian defense. And so what happened during the 40-day war is that Iran targeted, I think, 10 countries in which there were US and Israeli interests. And one of them was Cyprus. So Cyprus is not a regional country. It's not part of the West Asian region. But then Iranian missile, I think, successfully penetrated Cyprus. So I think that's what they could mean, is that some of the missiles have the longer ranges and they could probably reach as far as Cyprus and even further. So in that sense, it could become a war that's larger than a regional war. But whether China or Iran would get China or Russia would get directly involved on behalf of Iran, that's unlikely. So I don't think they would get into a direct military confrontation with the US over Iran. So it can't be, beyond the region in that sense. But I think China and Russia will continue to support Iran through intelligence and trade.
Well, one of the big developments in the last couple of months is Iran moving to formalize and institutionalize its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz through a new entity, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, and the announcement of a supervision area requiring transit authorization. What does this actually mean in practice, and how significant is this for the global economy if tensions do continue to escalate?
Yes, that's also a good question. I saw a report about that too, that they're trying to formalize some sort of control and management over the Strait of Hormuz. And one thing that the Iranian authorities have suggested is that they would use an insurance system. So every ship and vessel that passes through the strait would be insured by Iran, and that insurance would have a cost. But in this way, I think they would make the kind of it wouldn't be a direct toll in a sense. So it would be more an insurance that in order to be protected and safe, you'll be insured by us, and that would, continue the Iranian leverage and control over the strait, but it would also generate revenue for Iran and for the reconstruction effort. Because one thing that the Iranians asked in the 10-point plan that was offered to the Trump administration at the April 8th ceasefire was reparations. But I think the Iranians know well that, especially because it's such an affirmative ask from the US. I think it's a reasonable ask, but it's an affirmative ask. So the Americans will not give reparations to Iran because they haven't even given their own oppressed populations like Black people and Native Americans reparations. So why would they give the Iranians, who are kind of lower on that totem pole, they're not even American nationals, reparations? So they know that, but they need money for reconstruction because the damage that the US and Israel inflicted on Iran was in billions of dollars. So I think the insurance or whatever revenue they're able to generate through the Strait of Hormuz will help the reconstruction effort. And with the current leverage that they have, I think receiving some revenue from the strait is something that could happen in the near future. And there are reports that it might have happened already, that they might have already collected some toll, but I am not fully sure about that.
Okay, so I want to ask you, Navid, about two revelations that came out in the media over the last week. And one of them is related to a New York Times report that there were discussions inside of Washington and Tel Aviv about potential regime change scenarios involving former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Which struck a lot of people as bizarre, given that, I'm old enough to remember Western media and the Western governments once portrayed this man as essentially like the face of evil. He was constantly equated with Hitler when he was president by the US and the Israelis. So the first part of this question is I'm curious what you make of that report and the seriousness of it, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I saw some other people suggesting this was like some sort of disinformation ploy to like mess with the Iranians. So that's one. And the other revelation I wanted to talk to you about, which is perhaps a bit more serious, a lot more serious, I think, is the fact that we've now learned that there are two covert military and intelligence bases the Israelis built and are operating inside of Iraq. And that's been the case for years as a part of this war, the shadow war against Iran that they were conducting. The U.S. was running cover for this base, lying to their, Iraqi allies about its existence. And in fact, a really disturbing aspect of this is that an Iraqi shepherd who stumbled across these military bases or these covert sites informed Iraqi authorities about them. According to investigations, was then basically his attempt to inform the Iraqi authorities was intercepted by Israeli operatives. And then they basically tracked him and killed him before Iraqi forces could arrive at the location that he was informing on. So, I guess first the Ahmadinejad story, and then your thoughts on these covert Iraqi bases that were used to conduct war against Iran.
Yes, so I saw that New York Times reports about U.S. and Israel wanting to install Ahmadinejad as Iran's new leader. But yeah, I am skeptical. I mean, it is true that Ahmadinejad grew kind of less. I mean, because when he was president, he would challenge, these Western journalists. He would challenge the double standards. He would defend Iran's right to have a nuclear energy program. So he was very outspoken, unlike Khatami, who preceded him, who was a little bit softer, and he was more into the whole idea of the dialogue of civilizations. But Ahmadinejad was much more confrontational. And in a way, one reason that the sanctions intensified was because of Ahmadinejad, because he kind of was this confrontational Iranian president. And I mean, the sanctions were happening before that, but they became larger under his presidency. But over the years, especially I think he has some English language person running his social media, and he's tweeting about Tupac and NBA and like all these random things that the Americans might like. So maybe that's why they had an interest in him, because he was tweeting about, the NBA and about Tupac and about other things too. And like very humanitarian type tweets, he had become very soft, after his retirement from presidency. So maybe that there was an interest in him there, but I don't really see, I don't see how he could have been a pro-Israeli or pro-American leader, because even people, someone like Rouhani, who was president when the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, was signed in 2015, I would say he would be more kind of, he would be willing to give more concessions than someone like Ahmadinejad, even in his later years. So I'm skeptical of that report, but it's something that they could have discussed. It's something that they could have discussed, but whether they actually wanted to make it operational or whether Ahmadinejad would have agreed, that's another story. But regarding the operations from Iraq, that's something that is expected, because U.S. invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, not just to have control over those countries, but also to get closer to Iran. And if you look at the map, there are American bases all over Iranian borders and Iranian land. And what's ironic is, though, after the U.S. invasion, I would say Iran became stronger because Saddam was gone, and through the Shia networks that Iran had, Iran was able to actually have a lot of influence in Iraq. But it's kind of this double game where the U.S. has its presence and bases in Iraq, but Iran also has its influence, and I think they're kind of competing for power in Iraq. But what is very notable, the last thing I'll say, is that despite these sabotage efforts through Iraq and through Iraqi Kurdistan, including Erbil, and that's why, that's the reason that Iran has been launching missiles at Iraqi Kurdistan, because a lot of U.S. and Israeli interest there. Despite all that, Iran has been able to maintain a lot of influence in Iraq, and based on the resistance groups that are there, Iran has been able to retaliate and fight against the Americans and the Israelis, and also some of the NATO combat forces left Iraq after the Iranian operations during the 40-day war.
Well, zooming out a bit, Navid, Iran's two most powerful international partners are Russia and China. In your view, how have they done enough to support Iran during this conflict? Or has the war kind of exposed the limits of these alliances? And from the perspective of Tehran, can Iran count on these countries if the war does escalate further?
Yeah, so from a purely geopolitical perspective, I think it's actually the reverse of your question, in a sense, that Russia and China are more able to count on Iran, because formerly they thought that maybe, or everyone thought, not just Russia and China, but there was kind of this speculation that a Syria or Libya-like scenario may be possible in Iran. So we'll assassinate their leaders, and then we'll create economic desperation through jacking up inflation and through freezing Iranian assets and starving them of their dollar reserves. And then people will riot after, the leader is killed. And this is what they did in March. They started targeting all the police stations in the hope that people would attack the police stations, take up the arms. And they did the same thing back in the January riots, because the aim was that you help and fund certain rioters, and they go to the police stations and they take up the guns. But when that didn't work, then they did it through a military operation, but that did not work either. And it was actually really impressive how safe Iran and Tehran were after all the police stations were bombed back in March. So the hope was that you would create a Syria-like situation, and because of that, Russia and China were too worried to give Iran, their best defenses, so Russia wouldn't give, the best air defenses, or China wouldn't give the best weapons to Iran. But now that they've realized Iran was able to defend itself and withstand the assault of the American superpower and its main vassal state, Israel, I think they will count on Iran more in the future. But as I said in my previous responses, I don't think that they will ever directly confront the U.S. militarily for the sake of Iran, because they have their own realist and geopolitical interests. But if there is another round of fighting between U.S., Israel versus Iran, I think Russia and China will continue to provide intelligence to Iran, because it seems that they did that during the 40-day war.
Well, Navid, thank you so much for joining us. Your analysis is so important, and you're coming to us from Tehran, where you have been for the duration of this entire war. And I encourage people to go check out all of the interviews we've done with you, because you've always been on point. So we appreciate you, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Again, Navid Zarrinal, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. And last thing, Zoe said with the previous guest that Bolivia is inspiring, and Iran is also right now is inspiring if you're following it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Navid. And indeed, you really actually, Iran, I think, is the only country in the world that's actually standing up to the Americans right now.
Yeah.
Because everywhere you look, everyone's so terrified. They're like shaking. And, I had Prabhat Patnaik on a couple months ago at this point, just after the war had started. And he's a Marxist economist based in India. And he made the point that basically the entire global South, how it exists moving forward in the future, depends on whether Iran can come out of this being seen as a winner or not. Because if Iran loses, basically no other country will dare stand up to the Americans for a very, very, very long time. Whereas if Iran comes out of this seemingly having won, and the U.S. seems to have lost, then that'll actually inspire the rest of the global south in the sense of, yes, you can actually carve out some space for yourself to be independent of U.S. interests. Look what Iran just accomplished, a much smaller country that has far inferior military technology, spends way less, like not even close to as much as the Americans spend on the military. So anyways, appreciate Navid's analysis there. And of course, we'll be coming back to Iran again, as we always do. However, we are going to switch gears once again for our last segment here to talk about something very important taking place. I'm going to throw it to you, Zoe, to explain to us what the hell is going on with regard to Cuba and this U.S. attack on Raul Castro.
Well, Rania, if you were to watch CBS, Telemundo, Univision, sorry, those are both Spanish stations, but I happened to be watching one this morning, so that's why I mentioned it. CBS, NBC, etc., you would hear declarations from people like Maria Elvira Salazar, from Rep. Carlos Jimenez, that yesterday, May 20th, was, quote, the greatest day for Cuba and for Cuban democracy. Why is that? Well, yesterday, the U.S. Department of Justice filed formal charges against 94-year-old Cuban leader Raul Castro. He's a general in the Cuban army, and the former president of the island famously presided over the cooling off period between the United States and Cuba. He led that with Barack Obama. The Department of Justice in the United States has accused Raul Castro of conspiracy, murder, and destruction of aircraft for the 1996 downing of 2 aircrafts in Cuban airspace. This indictment was filed by U.S. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, and it still has some steps before it kind of has its legs. But it does seek a life sentence for one of the top historic leaders of the Cuban Revolution. If we can remember, Raul Castro was in the Sierra Maestra with Fidel Castro and the other leaders of the 26th of July movement, leading the charge against the Batista dictatorship and establishing the Cuban Revolution. So Raul Castro, again, historic leader of Cuba. And the incident that is referred to here, and I would just add quickly that Raul is charged alongside 4 other individuals. The incident that is referred to is in 1996. If we can all use a little time machine, we remember special period in Cuba. It is the height of U.S. I mean, it's hard to say the height of U.S. sabotage attacks against Cuba because it has been so consistent. But during this special period following the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. thinks, okay, great, now we're going to be able to, achieve our longstanding goal of overthrowing the Cuban Revolution. And so there were many different acts of sabotage and different operations led by the CIA using groups based in Miami to attack Cuba. One of these was a plot by this alleged, what was called the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue, Hermanos al Rescate, which supposedly flew unauthorized planes to Cuba to take migrants from Cuba to the United States. And so in 1996, there was an incident where one of these planes was flying in Cuban airspace, and Cuba issued a series of warnings saying this aircraft does not have authorization. Such incidents, cannot, you can't fly into our airspace unauthorized, and eventually shot down this plane. So now, 30 years later, an indictment is being brought against Raul Castro and several other individuals for the downing of this aircraft, once again, in Cuban airspace. And I just want to remind people that under Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, which is a document that the United States is a signatory to, and just international law generally, every sovereign state has the inherent right to defend its territory. So if an unauthorized plane is flying over your territory, you do have the right to defense. And that is exactly what Cuba did in 1996. And, you know, this indictment has been widely rejected by Cuban officials as clearly politically motivated. We are in one of the worst kind of moments of U.S.-Cuba relations in terms of a doubling down on all forms of sanctions and economic warfare on the island. We've covered multiple times the fuel blockade against Cuba that was instituted through a series of maneuvers, but including the naval blockade of Venezuela, and then actually an executive order released by the Trump administration at the end of January to say that any country could face tariffs if they send oil to Cuba. This was then ruled by a court that it was kind of like unconstitutional, but at the same time, Cuba has not received any fuel shipments besides one Russian tanker, which has its reserves have now run out. So this indictment is clearly politically motivated, not because I think it is, but actually because that's exactly how the Trump administration is explaining it. They are saying that this is a great moment for Cuban democracy. Marco Rubio has been just,
elated.
He released, actually before the indictment was unsealed, he released a very bizarre, I wish I could say corny, but it's actually quite threatening video in Spanish addressed to the Cuban people before this indictment was unsealed again, just kind of saying like, the moment for Cuba is coming, the moment for Cuba is coming. And I think the reaction of, again, both members of the Trump administration, but also Cuba hawks, like the ones that I mentioned, Carlos Jimenez, Maria Elvira Salazar, people have been saying in no uncertain terms that the Cuban Revolution must fall, that the U.S. should use all means necessary to destroy Cuba, to decapitate its leadership and do what the U.S. has tried to do in Iran, what it tried to do in Venezuela in order to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. And that's exactly what they've said since this indictment has been released. So again, Cuban officials have rejected this. There's a series of statements that have been released, by official entities. But Rania, I want to move now to just see what Trump administration officials are saying, how they're framing this, and get your reaction, because some of it's hard to kind of stomach. And so I want us to walk through it because it's very important to kind of understand this is the way that they're operating right now. So let's start with the first one, which will be Trump's tweet immediately after this indictment is unsealed. Wow. It is a image which says, America's enemies have been eliminated. What are we seeing on the screen, Rania, and what do you make of this?
This is just pure, gangsterism. This guy is such a criminal. He is taking credit for carrying out war crimes and murders. Some of these people have been assassinated. Eliminated, as he puts it. It's just really disgusting fascist behavior in a trolling capacity on the internet. And it's a perfect encapsulation of what this administration stands for. And his supporters, because it's such a cult, thinks this is cool, like some mafioso kind of stuff. Look how strong he is. Look how badass he is. This is just criminal. He is an international criminal. This is criminal behavior. It's very much in keeping with the kind of rise of flood the zone meme fascism that we've seen, with the rise of the MAGA movement, very similar to what we see from the Israelis as well. It's disgusting. It makes my stomach turn. Because it's a level of cruelty that comes with policies that are starving and killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Ronnie. And just to remind people, there's over 100,000 people in Cuba currently waiting for surgeries because hospitals are unable to perform all of the functions that they should be because of the fuel blockade. So just criminal behavior there. So, after this indictment was unsealed, Republicans and members of the Trump administration went on what seemed like a media frenzy. Like all of them are doing 1,000 interviews to just talk about how excited they are. So let's hear now from Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana and what he had to say about the indictment.
And number two, Fidel Castro, the original Castro, was pretty smart. He was evil, but he was smart. But these asshats since then have just been incompetent. They're like three-wheel shopping carts. I mean, they're just incompetent. All they know how to do is oppress people. They take all their money and they give it to the military and the police and themselves. And to hell with the good people of Cuba. And that's not a model for success. And they're gone. And they just don't know it yet, whether we do it through an invasion or not. I'd rather do it the easy way, but that's kind of up to the communists who are running things.
What's the easy way?
Yeah, what's the easy way, buddy? I mean, every accusation is a confession. Everything he just accused Cuba of doing, people like him do. Also, how are the people of Louisiana being served by this senator who's spending his time trying to destroy the island nation of Cuba and call it some sort of success, something successful? Like, why don't you worry about the people in your own state who voted, for whatever reason, voted you into power
through
gerrymandering,
because they're trying to wipe out the black vote.
I mean, it's just so insane, these people, and also calling Castro evil and stupid, neither of which is true, but Castro evil but smart. That guy's just evil because he sounds like an idiot with his little analogies and metaphors about a shopping cart with three wheels. Like what an idiot. It's that those are the people who are running this country into the ground. And people like him are giving all the money that the federal government has to the military and policing apparatus to subjugate the world and their own people who they're also impoverishing. So, I mean, Jesus Christ, again, every accusation is a confession. And these people are, unfortunately, they're evil idiots.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add here, on one hand, Louisiana has some of the worst socioeconomic indicators in terms of public health, in terms of education. It is a state that is deeply oppressed in terms of, just having hollowed out public funding for key elements and really, an atrocious racist policy against a large black population in the state. And at the same time, he's calling Raul Castro and Miguel Diaz-Canel incompetent idiots who all they know how to do is repress. Well, I'd just like to remind people, and you can learn more about Miguel Diaz-Canel in Breakthrough Media's documentary Cuba After Castro, which I highly recommend that people check out. But you can learn there, and you can learn, through your own research that actually during the pandemic, it was Miguel Diaz-Canel who, led efforts for Cuba to develop its own sovereign COVID-19 vaccines. It was the country with the lowest rate of death, and it did the most to protect its people. So I think that, someone who coming from a state with the lowest health indicators in the United States, accusing someone who actually put everything on hold in the economy to protect its people and save them from death is just quite rich. So as you said, every accusation is confession. I mean, it's ridiculous, but
I also want to add to what you're saying, just to note that the reason Cuba has the problems it has is because of the U.S. The U.S. is strangling Cuba. It's suffocating Cuba. Trump is saying it. They're denying them oil so people can't refrigerate their food because they can't fuel anything. There's the electricity is running out if it, however long it does exist. It's just horrendous what the U.S. is doing. It's criminal. It's barbaric. It's medieval. Meanwhile, places like Louisiana have horrible social indicators, not because some outside force is suffocating the people, but because the representation in this country is totally anti-democratic and is funded by a bunch of billionaires. The same people who are starving Cuba are also implementing policies to starve Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that Cuba actually is a country, I mean, it's almost comical when you think about it, that exports doctors
Yeah.
Like, they export doctors to go help save lives while the U.S. exports war. And then we have this billionaire-funded media apparatus that tries to make those doctors sound evil, but war sound good. So anyways.
There's a lot to say there. And finally, want to end with a clip from a press conference of Florida Senator Rick Scott, who, again, has a suggestion of how this indictment should be implemented.
And so hopefully now they're seeing that America will stand up for them, that they'll do it on their own. But if it takes something, we should not take anything off the table. I mean, the same thing happened to Maduro should happen to Raul Castro. But I'm not going to get ahead of whatever the Trump administration wants to do.
Yeah. So I just want to remind people the gravity of the situation. We know what happened on January 3rd. The U.S. Killed over 100 people. It bombed the capital of Venezuela. It was the first U.S. open military action against a South American country since I think those countries were made independent. Serious, massive violation of sovereignty. This is what all U.S. and Trump administration officials are threatening. They want to invade Cuba. They want to use this indictment to do what they've been trying to do for over 6 decades, which is overthrow the Cuban Revolution and really destroy the country so it can be a playground for the mafia and for these billionaires.
Yeah, and I mean, I also want to say, like, the every time the U.S. gets away with something, like with every time the U.S. does something criminal, and there's absolute impunity, as there was with the kidnapping of Maduro and the killing of 100 people, that's crazy. And everybody's forgotten about it. And now Maduro is sitting in solitary confinement in New York City. Every time the U.S. gets away with a criminal act, they're going to do it again. Because what they're learning, this cabal of gangsters that run America, what they're learning is that they can get away with more murder and more criminal activity with no consequences. And so every country, it starts with Cuba, it starts with Venezuela, it starts with Iran. It doesn't stay there. Every time you the world allows this to happen with no consequences, they are further eroding whatever rules exist still, and they're creating a future or allowing a future where anybody who says no to the US, even about something small, is going to be treated like that. Like, so even if, people, like, it's shocking to me how many countries sit on their hands, because I'm like, fine, you don't have any morals, fine, you don't care, fine, you don't care about Venezuela, you don't care about Cuba, I mean, screw you, but fine. But, like, this is going to come to you if this is allowed to continue. It's just like with Gaza. The more the Israelis can get away with, the more they're going to continue to spread that death machine. And that's going to be how they treat the entire world. So, not at all surprised that we see them wanting to implement the Maduro strategy in Cuba.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be following this story as always, and highly recommend that people do check out the documentary Cuba After Castro. Find a screening in your city. It is of utmost importance that people actually know when these officials say, like, we need to bring an end to communist tyranny, like what does that even mean? I think people would be very interested to know what that actually looks like on the ground, and that what a democratic process looks like in Cuba is actually quite interesting, and maybe you can learn something. So highly recommend people check that out. And we will, again, be following this story. It is, it started yesterday in a way, but it is definitely going to pick up in intensity in the coming weeks. So we'll be following it. And with that, I think we just want to remind everyone watching, please smash that like button.
Smash that.
We're at the end, but you can still throw money in the chat. We hate billionaires, but we love you. And remember, support Breakthrough News. Become a patron at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You can support us for as little as $5 a month. And we will keep bringing you that independent journalism that you so desperately need in these times. So, Rania, I think it's time to say goodbye.
Yes, goodbye, everyone, and we'll see you next week.